G'day, welcome back. This is the next video in my series on edge cases. This is where I take an endgame position which has a traditionally sort of known drawing zone, and I look at the boundaries of that drawing zone to work out what the key attacking threats of the stronger side are and what the defensive resources of the weaker side are. Now this is the third in a series I've done on the classic queen versus pawn endgame. We've already looked at the rook pawn, and we've already looked at the queen versus bishop pawn, because those are the two cases on the 7th rank where, because of stalemate tricks and so on, the weaker side has very good drawing chances if the attacking side's king is too far away. So just to revise that a little bit, let's just quickly go to analysis screen and we'll look at the Wikipedia page. This is a Wikipedia page on queen versus pawn endgames, and you can see the two positions there which I've already covered. First of all, you have the rook pawn on the 7th rank. Although white can make some progress, check with the queen, the king has to be quite close to be able to force checkmate, and you can see the drawing zone there. It's this middle position here. The white king has to be within 2 squares of those 2 squares, b3 and c2 respectively, because if white can do that, what happens is he improves the position of his queen, which you've seen in my earlier video, and then you move your king 1 square, black queens, and you move your king another square, and you'll notice that the king is a knight jump from the queenie square, and black can do nothing about the threat of checkmate. And then in the last video in this series I did on the queen versus bishop pawn on the 7th rank, you can see the same sort of idea, right? That if the king is on the sort of corner side, as it were, you can see there are 2 squares, b3 and d2, where white has to be within 1 square of to force the win. Once again, he uses queen checks to improve the position of his queen, and then he will move his king on to, for instance, b3, a knight jump away from c1. Black will promote his to a queen, and then white can deliver checkmate. And the same technique happens if you get to d2. Actually, you can stop the pawn by queening, or because you'd be covering it down the c file, for instance, would be one possible continuation. Okay, now what we see here, let's just go down a little bit. We're now going to look at the bishop pawn with the king on the center side. Now the general logic is that because the stalemate trick which black relies upon doesn't work straight away, white can check, force the black king in front of the pawn and get 1 more square. So you can see that there's basically a change in the position where white now has to be within 2 squares of the, in this case they've flipped it just to annoy me, but the g3 square, and you have the same sort of technique of black would queen and then white would move to g3 and be able to force checkmate. And on the other hand, you can see that the square d2, it's been moved across 1 square, by the way, and you have to be within 2 squares of d2. And what happens there is often you force a tricky checkmate, and we'll see that in action. So that's the why that box, it's a very big box, is defined. You can see that, like, you can be in this whole area here. White would be able to win in that position. Otherwise, it would be a draw. You can see also here there's this position. If I have time, I'll have a quick look at it, by Lolli, GM Battista Lolli. Very famous guy from the 18th century. I think we all know he has a line in the kind of the subline of the fried liver, I guess you'd call it, and a lot of endgame studies. And you can see that position is very similar to the one we're looking at. King and queen positions a little bit different, and white to move, white wins. So perhaps we can have a look at that, or it'll be part of our analysis of the queen versus bishop pawn we're going to move on to. And then it's actually been in a couple of famous actual endgames. Here's the Petrosian-Fischer one from 1958. They kind of agree to draw because the rook would sacrifice itself for 1 pawn, the other pawn queens, and you end up with this position where the king is outside the winning zone. Okay, that's enough for the intro. Let's close the Wikipedia page. And of course, what I want to have a quick look at first is just to give you a sense of where the drawing zone comes from. Here's my little simulation. Move the queen around. And what we want to do is it wants to be a win for white with white to move, and you can see there it's instantly identified those are the sort of the drawing zones. Move the queen around, the drawing zone kind of stays quite steady. Do something silly like put the position as a check for black, then it doesn't really work. But you can see basically the drawing zone is what it is. Even if you put the queen in bad positions, it looks like in most cases the white queen will be able to do the sort of the checks it requires to improve its position, and white king will advance. Now, we have a look at that, what confused me a little bit is that those squares I've now marked with kings are supposed to be the edge cases, right? And the whole area is an edge case. And the reality is that white has to do something from move one to force the win, right? Otherwise, black just promotes. So basically, all the squares are critical squares. What we will do is I just do the calculation, and we'll look at it now in the Scid because I find that a little bit easier than that. Okay, just give me 1 second. Okay, here we are. So let me just mark up those two key squares I mentioned. There's one here and there's one there. And the definition of the box will be, I mean, you can look at it. It's like basically two squares. One of those. Squares. Anyway, so this one is you're at one extreme there on the A5 square. Let's see how the process goes. I said that the process here is basically checking. You've got to move your queen in closer. Now queen f4 check. Black has to stop the white queen from landing on the c1 square, so it must move to d1. Then queen d4 check, and now black has two choices. He can either go in front, which is one line. Let's go in front, c1, and then now this is where we now, with the queen's in the right position, we run in, and there'll be no defense to checkmate. So a continuation here, which I haven't loaded up, but queen check, b3 check, can't interpose, because that'll be checkmate. Have to go in the corner, get back here, back, and checkmate. So basically, there'll be a way of checkmating along those processes. So go back to this position here, where rather than going to c1, which we just looked at, black's king moves away, thinking it will be tricky. So now black continues, queen c3. Right, we have to protect the pawn again, so we've got to move back to d1, and the continuation is we check, and we've moved in really close. Now black has to move in front, and we've got that line again where, just look at this, so we've got the queen in the ideal position, and now we have two squares to move in as black moves down, right? And actually, look at that, it can't even promote. Look at that, you say, oh, he's about to promote to a knight and fork the queen and the king, but you can't do that. So that is the A5 square, which is one of the extreme points that the king could have been on. So let me move to another game, so now we're at the far end on the other side. Now this is where some of these checkmate tricks come into account. So once again, it's like start checking. Queen to d4 check. So now black has three choices, shown there. Go through them one by one. Okay, if the king moves up to try and block the approach of the white king, that's effectively what's going on there. We now do this sneaky switch back. Now we're threatening to land on the c1 square, and now actually black can't do anything about that. We're going to land on c1 and win, so that'll be an easy win. So let's go back to this position. So there's two other lines where black stays in contact with his. Let's do king d1. So now the line is queen b3. It's often a trick we use just to sort of stop the black pawn from advancing. Now these lines are going to transpose. There's two possibilities: either sit in front of the pawn or move up again. So let's do the in front of the pawn line first. Then the continuation is follows. Now we start running our king across. Across. Now what are we going to do? Check, check. King comes even closer. And basically, you can see that from this position here that black's not going to be able to get his pawn. And if we just there is this line here where we go check, and then if remember this one, if black moves back in front of his pawn, we actually just go back a square because you actually have this very nasty checkmate. So that's one possibility. So that was looking at king in this position going to d1. We can also look at c1. Once again, this is now we start marching our king in. So black has to move his king again anyway. And now, just if you're going to be murdered on e2 again. So this is a key reason of why we're sitting on the f3 square. So now you understand why you need to be two squares, effectively one square, to move and protect the e2 square, and you protect the e2 square, and then in all these lines, you're able to get a checkmate going. So that shows you what happens if you're way over here on the king side, right? You improve your queen position, your queen ends up on b-file in most cases, and you advance your king across. And as I mentioned, this is a very key square, and basically as long as you're getting your king to protect that square, black gets checkmated pawn. Let's for completeness, let's have a look at some of these other ones. We've done a5, we've done g4, the e. Oh, what's the winning line here? Let's have a look. Check. Right, so we have to hold c1 square, then we'll just move checks to now get in front, king d3, check on the other side. You can see that this is, if we go in front, waste, king comes up. Here's another mating pattern we have, right? Once again, where this comes up in a few lines, just to sort of show the examples. So I hope that gives you the idea of why you need to be close to those two squares. Often it's the king holding checkmate there, and it's just moving in and forcing checkmate after black approaches queen. So to close out, what I thought I might quickly do is have a look at that position on Wikipedia page, which is attributed to Lolli. Okay, here we are, I've got it set up. Now you can see that this is a similar position. This is Lolli, obviously, like how we're talking 270 years ago, just moving the pieces around. So king's in a different position for black and for white. So does that really affect the outcome? You can see that the text there. The black king must be prevented from getting to the other side of his pawn, otherwise he can employ the stalemate defense. So that's what we saw often, that we have this idea where we're going to have our king supporting this square and we're going to checkmate. Let's see if that goes on here. So we'll just follow the line as given by Lolli, nothing wrong with it, queen b3. So as if black moves in front of the pawn, we're going to have the normal problem. So king d2, queen b2. Now we pinned the pawn, he can't move the pawn, king d1, and now we do the advance we were talking about. King f3, right? If he promotes, then we've got a mate, and they give a line there. If you can promote to a knight as well, but obviously it's a very bad position. Black does in this position is he tries to block, and I think we've seen this before. White can f2, black's got to keep holding the pawn. Now that we've got our king to this position and black's avoiding that checkmate, now we've got to move our queen a bit. Queen d4 check, king to c1, and we've seen this before. This is that nasty Zugway, test with king, gets mated on e1, which is really, really neat. So that's a really impressive analysis by Lolli back in the day, and really, really impressed by the way these guys came up with these studies a long time ago. I think that's all I wanted to cover on this position with a queen versus a bishop's pawn on the 7th rank, the drawing zone. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that, the third in this series, and thank you very much for watching.